So to focus the message after engaging the listener is to say, here is what we're going to find out, okay? Or here is the question. Sunday, the message was on Elijah seemed to have such power in prayer. James holds him up as an example. And yet James also says he's just an ordinary person. How was it possible for an ordinary person to pray in such a way that God did dramatic and spectacular things? That's the question. How is it possible for us, ordinary people? Okay? And I had to show that Elijah was ordinary and everything like that. But that's the question. What would make it possible for us as ordinary people to pray and to know that God was going to answer our prayer? What would make that possible? That's a question. It's inductive. But it's a focus of the message. Okay? Then I immediately, I think, followed it with a deductive central truth. So it turned it into deductive pretty fast. All right. Then after that, you have, at this point, you have engaged the audience in the topic, the subject, the theme, whatever it is you're going to talk about. Now, having engaged the listener out of their world, raising a question or giving a statement that is part of their world, now you're ready to move them toward the biblical framework. And you will now set the stage biblically. Okay? Where are you going? Why are we... You brought this topic up because somewhere in the Bible there is a place that addresses this topic. There is a spot in the Bible, a passage in the Bible, where this truth is given or where this question is answered. So get us oriented. Okay? Now don't give away the chapter and the verse at this point. Because if you do, they'll turn to it and they'll stop listening to you. All right? You're not ready for them to turn to your spot. You are ready to say something like, this was an issue when Paul found himself for the first time in a strange city. Okay? Now, they're kind of thinking, okay, this sounds like New Testament. Yeah, okay. And it's probably an epistle as opposed to a gospel, if they're biblical literate enough to come to that much of a conclusion. But all you're doing is setting it up, okay? Paul found himself in a strange city. He didn't know anyone. He didn't know any place to go. He wandered. And there was something that caught his attention. Okay. Or you might say something like, one of the early kings of Israel found himself in exactly this kind of a situation that I've described. And out of his experience, we find out what the answer is to our question of how we can, okay? I might set up a little bit more. He had just come to the throne 6 months earlier. His trusted advisors had deserted him. And so I'm just setting it up. I'm getting enough. In other words, whatever happened that they need to know before I get to my passage, here's where I tell it to them. Okay? This is background. This is context. This is the setting. Okay? Whatever information is prior to the passage I'm going to turn to that would help them to understand the passage, this is the spot I give it to them, not when I have them turn to the passage and then stop them and go backwards. John?
Like in my sermon, when do you explore the context that preceded what your verses are?
Same place. Same place.
Here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. For instance, if you're saying...
like mine comes right after, I do Philippians 2 where it comes right after the example of let this mind be in you in Christ Jesus.
Okay.
So I talk about the kenosis during this part?
Yes.
Not during my sermon?
Not during your sermon. If your sermon is on... it's what?
Work out your salvation.
Yeah, work out your salvation. Okay. You would say something like, you would introduce the topic. Okay. How are we to live in Christian community or something like that. Okay. Paul answers this question as he writes to some early Christian friends of his, or some friends of his in a different distant city. Okay, he has just explained to them how Christ gave up everything in order to serve our needs, and building on that, he's going to tell them how they are to serve each other's needs as they. Let's turn to Philippians 4. Okay, and I'm done with the kenosis. It's gone. Okay, this stage is usually only 3 or 4 sentences. Okay? You're not reviewing the theme and the argument of the book. Okay? You're not giving me information that isn't necessary for me to understand the passage you're going to address. In other words, you're not throwing in all the results of your study and your seminary education. You know, letting them know, revealing how much you know. No, you're only bringing up enough material so that I can understand the passage you're going to turn me to. If it's unnecessary to understand it, if I can understand the passage without it, then don't waste the time doing it. Save the time for getting relevant when the time comes up. Okay? So you're going to set the stage. After that, You're going to give a preview. Okay, if I'm going to set the stage, I'm going to just draw a picture of a Bible. Somewhere in the Bible you're going to go. Preview means you're going to mark off for me the hunks without giving away the content. In other words, you're going to say something like, today we're going to look at why this king of Israel found himself in this difficult spot. We're going to see what he did to get out of it, and we're going to see the good results that came to the kingdom from it. Okay? Now the listener says, okay, there's 3 big strokes. All right? I didn't tell you the reason why he found himself. I did not tell you the reason why he found himself in this was because his advisors had, whatever. I'm not giving you statements. I'm not giving you deductive strokes. I'm giving you inductive strokes. I'm going to answer this question for you, why he found himself in it. I'm going to answer this question, what did he do about it? I'm going to answer this question, what was the results that came to the kingdom? I'm raising the things I'm going to talk about, but I'm not telling you at this point what I'm going to say about them. So I am giving you an overview which will keep you clear on my hunks without giving away in advance all of my content. See? So that's what the preview is. Now, sometimes you don't need these one of these, and sometimes I flip them. They can be reversed. Okay? They are not essential always. If you don't need a preview, don't do it. If the stage is understanding the context or the setting isn't going to advance my understanding of the passage, then don't go to it. And then finally, you get down to the end and you are ready to announce the passage, and you tell them now you're ready for them to turn to the chapter. I don't even usually tell them the verse at this time. I know it says that in the textbook verse, but if you announce the verse, they'll turn to it, they'll start reading the verse. And so what I really do is I announce the chapter, they turn to the chapter, and I will give them my first stroke. And I will say that stroke a couple of times, and then I will say, this is what we see in verses 1 to 3, or verse 1, or whatever. And now they are ready to read with an understanding of what they're going to find in the verses. Okay? Whereas if I'd have given them the verse up here, they'd have read it and they'd say, I don't know what that is doing. Okay? So I don't give them the verse, I give them the chapter, and when they turn to the chapter, I will lay out my first broad stroke. And then after I've said that 2 or 3 times, which you will see in Oral Clarity this week, you have to say these big strokes 2 or 3 times, different words, different language, but saying essentially the same sentence 3 times. So they get it, okay, yeah, I got it. That's the first concept. Where is it? And I'll say it's from verses 1 and 2. And we'll read verses 1 and 2, and there it is. They read with intelligence after I've told them in advance what the content or concept is going to be. Okay? So that's the flow. All right? Now, answers to the quiz. Set the stage biblically, number 3. Or you could have it, number 4. Announce the passage, number 5. Engage, number 1. Focus is number 2. And preview is either number 3 or 4. Okay, number 2. To focus a message, you essentially give the listener either the deductive take-home truth or the inductive question. Okay, you okay on there? All right, now in Romans 12:1, I beseech you, I'm sorry, King James memory comes back too fast. I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, here's the imperative. Offer your bodies, okay? In light of what I have been talking about from chapters 1 through 11, all of the mercies of God, His justification, His sanctification, His giving of the Spirit to us, His faithfulness to His promises to take us to glory, in light of all of these mercies that God has given us, now I move into the section of my letter where I want to urge you how to live. And the first thing I want to say is, I want you to offer your bodies. Now, you read that, and the early part of verse 1 is background. It's context. It's setting. It's something that he has done beforehand to get here, and you should handle it right there. Okay? So you would say, your introduction might start off with, what should we offer God in light of all that He has done for us? You want to use the key word. You're going to see this in clarity this week. In light of all of his mercies, in light of every good blessing, in light of all that he has provided for us, in light of God's mercies, what should we offer him? Paul comes to that in his letter. He has talked about, and he can review the mercies. And now when he comes to chapter 12, he says, what should you do? Please turn to chapter 12. Now, I have pre-explained the whole first phrase. I have expounded it already. Okay? So when you turn to chapter 12, my point is not therefore and mercies and brothers or sisters, okay? I don't go into any of those. When you turn to chapter 12:1, and I'm ready to start my message, I will say something like, Paul says, in light of all of God's mercies, offer him your bodies. Read with me, verse 1. Therefore, I urge you, brothers, in light of God's mercies, that you present your bodies as a living sacrifice. And that's all I explained. Present your bodies. Okay? I've already explained the therefore in light of. I've already explained the mercies. I don't need to pay any attention to that. Now, that's much smoother than saying to the listener, what should we offer God? Let's turn to Romans 12:1. And then they turn, and then you say, notice that there's a therefore. Whenever you see a therefore, you ought to ask what it's there for. All right, it's corny pun. Okay, now I'm nowhere near answering the question. Okay, and then he says, brethren. Notice how he has an affectionate appeal toward them. Notice that he's approaching them as people who are dear to them. The warmth of a relationship that he has. Now I've explained therefore. There was brethren. In light of the mercies of God, the word mercies is a word that conveys we have received things that we don't deserve. And on I go for 5 minutes, and they've forgotten what question, which was, what am I supposed to offer God? Okay? Because I am going through a lot of little details that I don't need to do. I could have covered them in 4 sentences in the background. And when I get to it, I hit the imperative, which is the answer to the question. And they stay on track with me. They don't say to themselves, you asked a question, but you're not answering. What was the question? I forgot. And so we want to do that. All right? So, answer here. You should have circled the material that says, up through the word mercy. Therefore, I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy.
What if I spoke therefore, then God's mercy?
All right. Yeah, you're okay. Anybody else? Yeah, okay, that's far enough into the thing. I assume if you got to that part, you had to go through the first part. So if you circled God's mercy, that's good, okay? Anybody else? If you only circled therefore, that's probably not enough. Because you got to cover the mercies. All right. Number 4. Do I need to give an overview? Do I need to indicate the flow in this particular message? The answer is I do. It is true. I'm sorry. It's false. It is unnecessary. It is necessary. The answer is false. Okay, I got a negative in the question. Okay, it is necessary. It is false that it is unnecessary. Now, why is it necessary to have a preview in this one? Melissa, what do you think? You wouldn't be the one to explain. John, what do you think?
You ask a question and then you don't answer it right away.
That's right. That's it. Good. You've asked a question, how can we accomplish this seemingly impossible task? The listener says, good question, what's the answer? And you move to material that is not answering it. You move to necessary material. So you need, in the introduction, a point number 3, okay, a preview, an overview. After asking the question, how can we accomplish it, you say, let's see Jesus giving his disciples an impossible task that they are unable to do. And we will learn how they could have been able to do it. Okay, so the listener knows, okay, the big question comes 10 minutes later into the message. Okay? Isn't this great? Preaching is a learnable skill. I mean, once you learn a few things, all of a sudden you lay it out and the listeners are smiling and nodding their head, inviting you back. I mean, it's just more, It's just marvelous. It's just marvelous. Okay. All right. When I come to these preview elements where I'm laying out the hunks, the language I will use is either deductive or inductive. Okay? When is it deductive? And often it's only the first hunk that is deductive. Often it's only the first preview element that is deductive. What would make me use a deductive statement for the first hunk? Because why? Make an assertion, yeah. Why would I make an assertion? Because I said we're going to see why the king found this problem, what he did to do to solve it, and what was the good effect. That's 3 inductives. Okay? What would make this one a deductive? If I have already communicated this information earlier in the message. If I've already identified the situation. For instance, if in the introduction I talked about the times when you and I had our best friends desert us and the pain that that involves, okay? Then I would say in my preview, we're going to see a king who found his best friends deserting him. We're going to see what he did about it. And we're going to see what benefits it brought. So when you've essentially given that first concept as part of your introduction, perhaps in a contemporary way, and you simply want me to see that this spot in the Bible is what you were talking about, you'll make a deductive assertion. Okay? On the number 4, we're going to see a time when Jesus gave his disciples an impossible task. That's an assertion. It's a deductive. That they felt they were unable to do. Now comes the inductive one, and we're going to discover how they should have been able to do it. Okay? So you're working with deductive and inductive. The only time you use a deductive generally is if you have given that concept away. Otherwise, you're laying out, here's the questions I'm going to address. Here's what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about this, but I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to say about it. All right? Questions about that? One way of concluding a message is to ask an introspective question. How many have false? Good, that's the correct answer. Okay. Now, all right, you can have a possible 6 points, so put the number correct. When you come, I may say this again to you, when you are putting together your final message, there are 2 sections in the textbook you want to carefully go over again. One of them is on introductions. The other one is on clarity. You'll be secure on your unfolding of the biblical data, and we've done a lot of work in terms of relevancy and scenarios and pictures. What is the step that in the early stages of preaching that you want to review and just kind of use the textbook as a checklist are the chapters on introductions and on clarity for next week. I'll probably say that to you again. Just to make sure you do that.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
For the last question, you say it's not good to have an introductive or introspective question.
Yeah.
Can you unpack it a little bit?
Yeah. If I've talked to fathers about being a good father and that there are certain things that good fathers do to build good relationships with the son, and I've laid out some principles by which they've been checking themselves. Okay? So if I say at the end of the thing, so ask yourself, am I the kind of father that's raising a worthy son? Okay, I've set them up for a lot of bad answers. I mean, I got some guys out there saying, no, that's a downer. Okay? So I've asked them to look deeply inside themselves and come up with an answer. Chances are they're not going to do that anyway, especially if the answer is going to be a negative one. So instead of putting it as an introspective question, which might have a negative answer to it, I will put it as a positive encouragement or exhortation. I will say something like, so let us be men who say to ourselves from this day forward, I'm going to be the kind of a father that's going to raise a worthy son. And every man can say, okay. from this day forward. Don't ask me to look in the back. I can't change the past. All I can do is condemn myself for the past. Okay? I can look forward. And I think I do that.
Could that though be an opportunity for them to connect with the Lord and have their weakness or a moment for prayer and reflection, and then
Yeah.
Because I think it's when I was reading, you said that the sermon is an extended meditation on the Word.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it's some kind of
Well, you know, I don't want to make a blanket statement that apply to all sermons. I mean, in the example I've been using, they've probably been meditating on it as I've gone through the 3 things that help you raise a worthy son. And they've probably been feeling, I don't know if I do good on that one, and, you know, already. So they've kind of already done that. The question is, how do I end the sermon? Yeah. Now, I could at the end say, you know, a lot of us, we think, man, I just haven't done a bang-up job on this. Okay? But I have some years ahead, and I'm going to make them good. Let's commit ourselves to that. So, yeah, I could acknowledge a failure, a weakness, or something. Just kind of listen to it when people do it to you. When you're in the audience and somebody ends on an introspective question, kind of examine how much mental effort do you put into that question. Just, you know. And you'll probably say to yourself, not a lot.
well, you can ask them. So, meaning,
Yeah,
I
maybe.
guess I'm always trying to connect with the Lord.
Yeah, yeah,
And I don't want to just try to go accomplish this. I want to just try to,
yeah.
I want the flock to consider through.
Yeah. Now, now, if you ask a question that it isn't introspective. If you ask a question that says, what can I do that will draw on the Spirit's resources for making this happen? That's not introspective in the sense of examining myself and how have I been on this topic. No. See, you're doing the same thing. You're saying, what can I do? That's better than saying, what have I done? See? Because what have I done leads to judgment. It's negative. Okay? What can I do? And then if you say, I want to give you a minute and a half, and you have a spot on your bulletin where I've left the last half of the page blank. I want you to write down 3 things. And then the choir will sing. And you give them a minute and a half silence. And some people will respond to that. And that's fine. I don't mind something like that. But again, it's what can I do? Yeah, it's not that I'm opposed to a question. It's that introspective question which can come up negative. That's kind of the thing. I just feel it's better just to get something positive. Okay, you have Unit 3, and Unit 3 is available digitally too. Let's turn to Ephesians and the new material that you just got. Page 10 of the yellow handout, the beginning of Unit 3. Will be an example of a sermon outline. This sermon outline shows the flow of the introduction, again, in full sentences. It shows the flow of the body of the message, and it has some idea of what the conclusion is going to be. This would be an example of a sermon outline that you would bring when you come next week. Now, you cannot fit this on one page if you're going to go 16 points, okay? The only reason I put it up here is not because you're able to see it, but because if I at least point to here, you can see it down in front of you. So you can read it off your page in front of you if I give you a thing. Now, what would you do in order to fit this on one page at a 16 point? What you would do is you start taking out some of these things, okay? You take out these internal small points so that just the bigger strokes appear. When you give us the outline orally in class, you will say something like, I'm going to give a couple of examples under here, and you don't need to show that on the screen. You can even say, if you need to do it, you can drop off all of these, and you can say, I'm going to talk about how this temptation to lie will show up, and I'm going to talk about how the belt of truth will help us counteract against it. And if you need to, all of this does not need to appear on what you put on the screen in class. Now, if you're turning in just regular sheets to me, which I'm going to take to my office, you can put as much as you want. You can go 2 pages. But if you're presenting in class, I want it to be on one sheet that the eye can see, and it needs to be 16 points since we don't have anything in front of us. Okay, how does the flow of the introduction work? Okay, this is the engaging part. I'm going to sing a little song. And there's something about that children's song in Sunday school that's not right. Bad theology, okay? That's not bad theology, it's bad observation. Okay, okay. This is the preview, okay? This is a deductive statement. I want us to see that the devil is after me. And the reason it's a deductive statement is the song says the devil is after me. Okay? So we're going to see, yeah, that part is true. This is inductive because the song says he's throwing sticks. No, he's throwing more than sticks. What is he throwing? Okay, so it's inductive. And then how can we protect ourselves against it? So I go from deductive to inductive to inductive. There is no context. It's unnecessary to tell them that Paul is reviewing materials he has said earlier. That won't help them understand once I go through the message. There isn't anything in that review that will help them understand the passage any better. Okay? This preview is basically also a focus because it raises the key question inductively that is going to answer. Okay? I may have even said something like this a little bit earlier. How can we protect ourselves? We're going to see that the devil is after us and the weapons he has and how we can protect ourselves against. I don't know. I'd have to go back and look. But basically, this inductively sets up the big thrust that the message is after. Okay, this is an inductive structure. The second question is the big one. It's the primary question. It's the dominant question that this message is addressing. It's the dominant question Paul is addressing. How can we protect ourselves against the enemy and the weapons, the schemes he has against us? Okay? Now, the first unit, we have an enemy of immense power, superior intelligence, who wants to destroy us. Okay? And I'm sorry, immense power, superior intelligence, who hates us intensely and wants us to destroy us. Okay? Now, I have given away all three concepts. I could instead say, what kind of an enemy do we have? I could raise an inductive question here. Roman numerals can be inductive. You're going to see this in the clarity if you have a list. And I have a list. I have this kind of an enemy, and this kind of an enemy, and this kind of an enemy. He has this characteristic, and this characteristic, and this characteristic. It's a list. So I could raise an inductive question and not give away all three concepts. What you cannot do is raise an inductive question if the first point doesn't sound like an answer to it. You're going to come across that in clarity. Okay? Clarity, the clarity chapter will take a little bit of thinking on your part. Don't brush it off. Don't say to yourself, oh, this is hard to understand. No. If you don't understand it, that lack of understanding will show up when you preach. Okay? So fight your way through to understanding it. If it's a bad time of night and you're asleep, put it away, get up early, drink coffee, read it in the morning when you're sharp. But it is imperative that you understand the clarity issues, because otherwise you won't do it. And one of the clarity issues is, when do I have to give a deductive statement at the Roman numeral? When can I get away with just the transitional question and let the subpoints answer it? Can I say that again? Okay. Lots of times you'll hear a preacher say, why did Israel fail to obey God's command to keep the Sabbath? There's the question. Why did Israel fail to keep God's command to keep the Sabbath? And you say, all right, answer that. And the speaker says, God gave the Sabbath way back in the book of Exodus in order to provide rest and a time of cessation from work for Israel. Okay? The Sabbath was in operation even before God gave a command, which might lead us to believe that it's in operation even after the law is done away with. Now, what did I say the question was we're going to answer? Why did he what? Fail to keep it. Okay, you remembered. But if I had gone into details on any of those first 2 points, you would have lost the question. Okay? Because I'm not answering it. Now, why? I'm heading toward the answer, but the answer is about 4 or 5 subpoints down the list. I know that. I know I'm going to give you the answer. I know it's coming. It's in the pipeline. It's coming up. Listeners don't hear pipelines. All they hear is what's out there. Okay? And so I have asked you a question that I'm not going to answer for 5 minutes. Okay? Whenever you have an answer to your question that is way down here, you can use the question to get into a transition, but you must immediately answer the question with a deductive assertion of what the answer is. Why did Israel fail to keep the Sabbath? The answer is because they didn't see that it was to their benefit to keep it. They didn't see that that day was getting them ahead. They thought they were falling behind economically because they were not being productive in their labor on that day. And they stopped keeping the Sabbath in order to get economically ahead. God had given the Sabbath in order for them to have rest. Okay? It was part of God's plan for human beings before he even gave the law. You see the Sabbath occurring way back in Exodus 16 when the manna falls and they don't work. And the law isn't given until Exodus 20. Okay? The Sabbath is not part of the law. It's part of God's time. Okay. Now you know where we're heading. Okay? You'll get into that with the clarity chapter. Okay. Back to here. I could have done that here. Now, if my question was, why did Israel fail to keep the Sabbath? If I say there were 2 reasons why they failed to keep the Sabbath. Now I can just go one at a time. Okay? The first reason why they failed to keep the Sabbath. It sounds like an answer to the question. It's a partial answer, but it is an answer. Okay? And then I can talk about that for 5 minutes without telling you what the second one is. When I get to the second one, I say, not only did they fail to keep it, because they didn't see that it was economically to their advantage, they also failed to keep it because they saw the northern nation was keeping it. And I can go into it. See, I didn't need to give you that second one at the stop. Generally, I don't give away a list in my Roman numeral. I just lay it out one at a time. Okay? Almost always, though, my Roman numeral, my subpoints are not lists, and so almost always you're leading with a dominant point.
So can I
Yeah.
try to help see if I understand this?
Yeah.
So what you're saying is if you ask a question in the beginning inductively, you have to...
I'm going to let you continue. I just want to make sure. I'm not talking about this question.
No, you're talking about...
I'm talking about Roman numerals.
Yeah.
Okay.
You have to be set to answer it in a list. Or
If you ask a question, yes,
ask a question, an inductive question,
you have to be set to answer it in a list.
but if you do a deductive statement where you make a statement and assertion, then you can go through kind of a progression.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And in fact, sometimes I might even, after making that statement, the deductive statement, if I've got a kind of a long involved progression, I might say, why did Israel fail? Because they saw that it was not economically feasible for them to do that. We're going to see that God gave it for economic reasons in order to make them restful and more productive. We're going to see that Israel found that that didn't seem to be their advantage, and so they stopped doing it. And I've kind of laid out even a sort of a preview of my internal subpoints that are going to get me to the answer that I've already given you. Okay? And sometimes even inductively, if you do ask the question, if you're really strong in the previous, if you can say, why did Israel fail to keep it? Okay? We're going to come to the answer to that question. Why did they fail? Okay? But first we're going to see why God gave it. And then we're going to see how they didn't buy that reason, which is why they failed. So why did God give it? Why did Israel not buy it? And that will tell, actually I probably only got 2 points, I don't need that third one, of why did they fail to keep it, because they didn't buy the reason God gave it. But you can sometimes do that. Okay, we'll have a chance to go over this a lot next week and see a lot of examples in these sermons of these clarity issues. And when I play the tape for you on the following week, I'm going to say inductive, because there's a list coming. Deductive, because it's got a progression. So I'll just flag all of those things in an oral message, and you'll see all that happening. Okay, this is a sermon outline. All right, let's kind of get an idea of how this sermon unfolds, and we'll look even more carefully at the introduction as we do this. All right, page 11. Here's the engaging part. There's a little song the children sometimes learn. 1, 2, 3, the devil's after me. 4, 5, 6, he's always throwing sticks. 7, 8, 9, he misses every time. Hallelujah, hallelujah, amen. Okay, all right. The first part of that song is accurate. The devil is after me. That's true. But the second part doesn't quite capture what's happening. Throwing sticks? Nope. Throwing more than sticks, weapons much more deadly. Third part, flat wrong. Unfortunately, he doesn't miss every time. If I were to sing the song more honestly, 1, 2, 3, the devil's after me. 4, 5, sticks, he's throwing more than sticks. 7, 8, 9, he hits me many a time. Lord help me, amen. Okay? All right, now this song is setting up the shield of faith. Okay, that's the focus of this message, the shield of faith, which is the flaming arrows. So that's, it's not just generally about the armor. This one is setting up the piece of armor that most of the message is going to be about. Okay, this morning from Scripture, here comes the preview now. The preview that I talked about. And the preview which is also going to set up the inductive focus question. Preview. I want us to see that, now this is deductive, the devil is indeed after us. Because I've already said that he is. Okay, so it's deductive. But I have to show you from the Bible that that's a true statement. I have to show you from the Bible that the Bible says that. I just don't want you to take my word for it or children's songs' word for it, okay? Second, I want you to see what he's throwing. Now that's inductive. I don't want to reveal and give away my message. Okay? Finally, what defense can we have? All right? So I've set that all up. Now I will say, please turn to Ephesians chapter 6. I tell them the chapter, but I don't tell them the verse. Okay? Notice I'm not going to give them the verse. I don't want them reading. I want them looking at me. So I wait until they all find chapter 6. Their heads are all popped up. And then I say, the first thing we're going to see, and I repeat, 1, 2, 3, the devil's after me. We have an enemy, and I describe him and his characteristics. Let's read this kind of an enemy in verses 10 to 12. And now, for the first time, they are actually looking at Bible verses. And they know what they're looking for. They expect to read of an enemy who is hostile, scheming, and powerful. All right? Questions so far about what we've done? All right, let's just kind of go through it. On the bottom of page 11, we go through the fact of, this is the first movement of the text. This is Roman number 1. We're into the enemy. We're into the Satan. Yeah. So
the song in the beginning was the engaging, right? And then when you said that it's not always true.
I'm still engaging.
That's still engaging.
That's still engaging.
Where's the focus at then?
The focus is at the end of the preview. The preview is right here. This morning I want us, here are the 3 hunks, and this third hunk is the big question.
But the focus on your thing up here is number 2.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I should say that sometimes when you set up a preview, the preview focuses the question. This one, the preview is the focus. Generally, that's the flow. That's the flow that will happen 80, 90% of the time. Yeah.
I don't see any setup related to the passage.
You don't see any what?
Setup for the biblical passage?
No, there's no background. Okay? It isn't going to help him to know that he is reviewing things he said in the 2 or 3 previous chapters. They don't need to know that. It isn't that piece of information that he is reviewing doesn't add to the clarity of anything that I'm going to say. Because I'm not going to go back and reference something that he said. In my study, I knew he was reviewing. In my study, that helped me decide that these things were behavioral, not doctrinal. But having decided that they're behavioral, I will simply present them as behavioral. The listener is not benefited by an argument of where Paul has been up until this point.
So that's because we decided to start the sermon with that song. It's because of the way that we decided to introduce the sermon. We've done it more as a, we're going to learn about the Ephesians of the church and how it relates to us as a church, then it might be more appropriate to give them that.
But if I'm focusing on the armor, I'm not sure how much of the Ephesians church history or the prior contents of the letter is even necessary to understanding the armor. The armor is kind of a fairly standalone. Yeah, it just happens to be that. Yeah.
Our passage can stand alone on its own if that truth comes out without having to know background.
You can do that too. Yeah, you can omit that part. And if you do have background, I mean, suppose John was preaching on the kenosis passage. I mean, he would set it up and say, to what extent should we be willing to care about somebody else's interests ahead of our own? To what extent? Paul is going to answer that question for us. He has encouraged the listeners. Everyone should look on the interests of others and not on their own. To what extent should we do that? His answer to that is, let's look at to what extent Christ did it. Now see, I gave you in 2 sentences the background. Paul has encouraged them that every person should look on it themselves. And that's all I needed. The context or the setting or background is only the information that I need to know to get into your passage. When you start adding more than that, it's unnecessary, it's immaterial, and it confuses the listener about how much of this do I need to remember to understand where you're going to go after you get through with it. And the answer is no, you don't need very much. So in some cases you can get away. If I'm preaching, if I'm doing a Father's Day message and I'm saying what does the Bible have to say about what fathers, I'll go to Ephesians 6:4. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger. I don't need to give you the fact that Paul at this stage is in a table talk section. He has already dealt with husband and wife relationship, and he has dealt with the master-servant relationship, and now he comes to the parent-child relationship. He's got reciprocal. That isn't going to help you understand what fathers are supposed to do or not do. I can treat it as a standalone verse, practically. Now, not all of them are that way, but if they are, you'd say to yourself, how much is necessary for me to say in order for them to understand the passage I'm going to talk about? And usually the answer to that question is a whole lot less than most people say. Okay?
And this is all to try to focus on the take-home truth,
Yeah.
so it doesn't get them bogged down with
Yeah.
extraneous
Information
Yeah.
that isn't contributing to their understanding of the truth or to your application of the truth. Yeah. Maybe this is in the textbook, I don't know. When you fly and you come in for a landing, and the pilot comes on to talk about what you're going to find on the ground, and he will say something like, visibility is 17 miles. The winds are out of the southwest at 14 miles an hour. And I'm thinking, maybe you need to know that to land the plane. I don't need to know that to get off the plane. All I need to know is, should I take my umbrella out of my briefcase because it's raining outside? See, he's giving. Or you're watching the news at night. The weather person comes on. They give you cold pressure fronts. They give you jet stream areas. And what do you want to know? You want to know how hot it's going to be tomorrow. That's all. Or do I need to take an umbrella with me when I go to work? it just astounds me. The weather report is 7 minutes. I'm interested in only 30 seconds. Why are you paying this person to give me all of this information? I mean, I'd rather have some more news. Okay? It's just a lot of extraneous news that is immaterial to the listener. Okay? And that's what we do with this background stuff. We give them more than the listener needs to know, and that kind of a thing. Okay. Good questions. All right. Bottom of page 11, you have the enemy. And we go through his hostility. We talk about his power. And what could he do if he wanted to come against you in his power? Middle of page 12. He could burn your house or level your buildings. How do I know that? Down at the bottom of page 12, he has the power to physically affect your bodies. How do I know that? Top of page 13, not only does he have the forces of nature and physically affect your body, he can play with your mind. He can influence your thoughts. All right, these are things that we kind of went over. Satan has this kind of power, okay? Incredible power, okay? Now, middle of page 13, I've moved from his hostility, his wanting to choke us, struggle. I've moved through his power, and now I come to the fact that he has knowledge. He is penetrating intelligence. He has schemes. He knows what to do. Okay, and then from the bottom of page 13, what does he know about us that enables him to bring his power to bear in order to accomplish his deadly goal? And that goes on into page 14. And about the middle of page 14, we're ready to summarize the fact of what the enemy is like, and now what do we need to do? Okay? We need to be able to defend ourselves against him. And so you can see I've moved into verse 13. That is why we need to arm ourselves to protect ourselves against his scheme. And that's what's going to happen in verse 13 and following. And here I am back to the focus question, how to resist the schemes of the devil. Okay? And the answer is put on the armor of God. And here for the first time, we move into Roman numeral 2, and the second major concept of the armor of God comes up. Okay? Now, the rest of the message will take up a scheme, and then it will talk about the armor on it. So, verse 14, bottom page 14, one of Satan's schemes is to get us to lie. And so we need to arm ourselves with a belt of truth. What do I mean by that? We must have an unswerving commitment to tell the truth. Okay? So, I read the verse 14. I don't read all the armor. I only read as much of the armor as I'm going to talk about immediately. Okay? So I'm only going to read verse 14, talk about verse 14. And I will describe the Roman soldier and his belt. And the first weapon is to tell the truth. And it looks like top in page 14, a third of the way down, I brought up the schemes, and I said his first scheme is to get us to lie, and I gave you 3 indented examples of what that might be. Okay? This is on page 14. Okay? Going from his schemes, I went into his first scheme, which is to lie. I gave 3 examples, 3 situations, very brief. I wish I had time to flesh them out. I wish I had time to give more, but I've just got to cover the first few pieces of armor fairly quickly because I want to concentrate on the shield of faith, okay? And I don't have the time here to go back and show you how a belt of truth or a conviction to tell the truth would work against those schemes. If I were preaching a whole message on truth, I would then pause at this part and I would go back to each one of those situations on the previous page and I would show how truthfulness would show up in those schemes, okay? So that I'm giving you I'm being as concrete in the answers as I was in the problem. The problem is I will be tempted. how to defend myself. The answer would appear here if I had more time to do it. Okay? There's another scheme, the scheme of unrighteousness, immorality, impurity. Examples, examples, examples. Okay? We need, therefore, a breastplate. What was the Roman breastplate? And we need to commit to being righteous. And again, no time to go back in and talk about it. Okay. Third scheme, attack our relationships. Example, example, example. That's what the feet are for. Okay? Again, no time to go back in and apply it. Summary, so far. This is the enemy that is coming against us. Reviewing, full of hatred, intent on destroying, incredible power, penetrating intelligence, knows exactly which scheme is most likely to work and attack and how to go about it. All right, I've reviewed. Okay, top of page 16, back to the little song. The beginning of the children's song is absolutely true. The devil's after me. He has focused his full attention on us. He intends to destroy us. Now I'm ready to move into the next scheme or weapon, and this is the one I'm going to spend the time on. One weapon more than any other that he uses. For the next few minutes, I want to focus on that weapon because, back to the song, it's wrong. He's always throwing sticks. No, more than sticks, much more deadly. He's throwing flaming arrows. Now I'm ready to read the verse that has flaming arrows in it. I need to answer, what are these flaming arrows? Okay, the picture comes back to the Roman armor, warfare in Roman times. The fact that this weapon could nullify any of the other defenses. Okay, what is this weapon? It is doubt of the goodness of God. Saying that several times toward the bottom of page 16. Where did I come up with that interpretation? Eve. Okay? The top of page 17, the penetrating arrow of doubt. Again, showing that if that one hits, the other virtues will give way, just like the defenses of the Roman soldier would give way. Okay? What would that attack look like? How would that attack show up? Okay? I'm sorry, I go through showing how all the other armor falls apart on verse 17. Doubt in the goodness of God. Bottom of page 17. He's throwing more than sticks. Protect me. I need you. What is our protection? Into the shield of faith. Okay? Explain what the shields are. Talk about faith is faith in the goodness of God. Show how that faith will enable me to stay true to the other virtues of truth and morality and peace. This is our protection. Faith that things are not out of God's control, that his loving hands are shaping my life. Now here are a few applications, very brief because I'm running out of time. Whatever is happening in my health, whatever's happening at work, whatever's happening with my children, my husband, my wife. Regardless of my foolishness, my failures, my sin, if I come back to you, faith in your goodness. Take up the shield of faith, and then I think I just quote Peter and Romans at the end as a way of summarizing.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.